Whether you're skeptical of astrology, you're new to astrology, or looking to deepen your understanding of astrology and your birth chart, this episode is ready to answer all of your astrology questions. This conversation with astrologer Christina Lyon of Lua Astrology talks about what astrology really is, how to understand your birth chart, and how astrology relates to mental health and can be used as a tool during times of transition and change. So much good stuff is in this episode. She answers all of the questions you sent in, so be sure to listen. And make sure you listen all the way through this episode to get a code for 15% off your first reading with Christina. So I hope you enjoy, and let's get started. Everybody's learning, everybody's growing, everybody's got to start somewhere. How the wise one grows. Hi everyone, and welcome back to How the Wise One Grows. Today we have a really special guest, but before we get started, let's just take a moment to settle in and land here together with 3 deep breaths. So just situate yourself wherever you are, find stillness if you can, and take a moment to notice your connection to the earth beneath you. Let your body become heavy as the earth lifts you up. And take a big breath in, fill your chest, fill your belly with air. Exhale, open your mouth. Let it out. Again, inhale, fill your chest, fill your belly with air. Exhale, open your mouth, let it go. One more big inhale. And exhale. And you can slowly return to your sensation of your body touching the earth and open your eyes as you return to this space. Today we have Christina Lyon here with us to talk about astrology. Christina is a professional astrologer and the creator of Lua Astrology. Did I say that right? Yeah. Christina uses her intuitive gifts and knowledge of astrology, psychology, and numerology to offer personalized natal chart readings to her clients. As a Gemini sun, Sagittarius moon, and Sagittarius rising, born under a full moon lunar eclipse, Christina is a self-proclaimed rebel and lover of all things occult. She sees astrology as the language of the universe and a cosmic blueprint to understanding your soul's karma and purpose in life. Christina completed her BS in psychology from Virginia Commonwealth University and received a minor in religious studies. She has been studying astrology since 2014 and has completed a year-long astrology course in 2021 created by professional astrologer Heather Eland, MA. Christina is also a 200-hour registered yoga teacher from Kripalu Center for Yoga and a holistic health coach certified by the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. Christina practices traditional astrology and uses the whole sign house system in her readings. As I was just reading that last part of your bio, I was like, oh my God, she's a Gemini for sure. I love that. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to do this.
Oh my gosh, me too. I'm so excited you're here. Okay. So I want to just start by asking, I think astrology is maybe getting bigger and bigger in popular culture lately. But for those who don't know what astrology is, I guess what would be your rundown of explaining it?
Yeah, so astrology is essentially the study of the celestial bodies and their movement, and then how that impacts our behavior and the world at large. And so that's kind of like a traditional definition. My more personalized definition is I see astrology kind of like as a cosmic blueprint to your soul's destiny, and I can look into your natal chart to see your strengths. I can see challenges or areas where, there could be karma, things like that. So I really use astrology to dive deep into a person's almost like karmic contract in this lifetime and what their soul is really seeking out of being here in this life.
Mm-hmm. And how did you first get into astrology and start working with it?
Yeah, so I have always been pretty interested in it. I would say even as a young girl, I knew about astrology, like sun sign astrology. So I definitely dabbled back then, but it wasn't until about 2014 until I really started studying. And the truth is, my grandfather and my dog died in the same month.
Mm,
I was just going through a really hard time. I was around 21 at that age and, beginning my transition kind of like out of college and not really sure what I wanted to do with my life. And so it was actually at that same time that I got really into my yoga practice. And then I ended up going to Kripalu and doing my yoga training. But astrology was just something I always had a really strong pull for. I've always been interested in psychology. That's what I studied in undergrad and religious studies. So it just kind of made sense for me, I think, as a person to learn more about astrology.
so has it been something that, I guess, like, why do you continue to work with it and how does it support you?
Yeah, so I actually view astrology similar to how I view my yoga practice. And
Mm,
a lot of times, people will ask that question like, oh, like, do you believe in astrology? Or like, don't really know much about astrology. So they kind of have like a hard time grasping it. And the way that I look at astrology is that it's not so much of a belief system for me. I mean, I do obviously believe in it, but for me, it's more of a practice. And I view my astrology practice similar to how I view my yoga practice. And when you start practicing yoga, you start to see the benefits. And it might not be, from the first time you take your first meditation or, do your first asana practice, but over time, you really start to feel the benefits. And that's how I view my astrology practice. I practice it because it has worked for me and helped me. And so that's why I continue to practice it. And I really relate it to just helping me to understand myself better, helping me to really understand and have compassion for others. And that has just informed me in a way that I can connect and relate to people. And instead of maybe being a little bit like, there's certain signs that people might be like, oh, like I don't really like Leo because they're like so
mm-hmm.
flashy and intense. Well, astrology for me, I've learned to absolutely love Leos. And I think part of why that is because I have Leo in my ninth house. And in astrology, you can look at your chart to see where certain aspects or where certain houses are going to influence you. And the ninth house is where you can learn the most from. And I actually have my Leo in the ninth house. And I think that's why I really love Leos because it's like the ninth house is who I learn the most from.
Mm,
A lot of times I think like people think of Leo and they're like, oh, they're so loud or like flashy and intense or whatever. But it's like the truth is that Leo is ruled by the sun and Leos are here to shine. And so when you know that about a Leo and you offer them the space and kind of like, you're like, here's your stage, please. Then you're not going to feel this competition with them because you're understanding that that's a part of their soul's purpose. And for me, like I love seeing my Leo friends shine and like take up the center stage because that's what they're here to do. So oftentimes I think the signs that we don't really like or don't vibe with as much is because it's a lesson within yourself that you need to learn. And this is a little news flash for anyone listening that's like doesn't realize this, but we actually all have all 12 signs in our chart. So you can't really say that you don't like a certain sign because that's probably just a reflection of somewhere in your own chart or something about yourself
mm.
that you don't like.
I love that reminder. Um, so much of what you just said got me really excited. And I think first, kind of pinpointing what you said about relating astrology as a practice. I feel similarly when people say, like, believe in astrology. Feels kind of like a weird phrase to me because to me, and this might be like unpopular opinion, but I don't really feel like it's something to believe in or not. It's like, it's the stars. It's something that is. And I see it as like a choice, a practice of like something to work with, but just like you were saying. And I also think like when you're talking about how we have all of the 12 signs in all of us, it reminds me again a lot of the practice of yoga, and I think a lot of why I feel a connection to astrology, because it becomes, in my interpretation, yoga becomes about finding this union and connection. And it's another place where we find connection to the wholeness. So like the stars are a part of us too. All of the parts of them are a part of us. So it's like learning how to work with the whole person that you are. And I see it as another tool that I can have in my toolbox to understand who I am, what might be going on within me and around me, and just a kind of like a giving you a scaffolding as you navigate it. And I guess you kind of touched on this a good bit in that last bit, but I feel like there's a lot of people who are skeptical of astrology and think that it's like stupid or woo-woo or whatever. It's something I notice more and more too. How would you kind of help break down that barrier and explain astrology in a way that could help open that door for someone who might be like, okay, interesting, but not for me?
Totally. So I would say that if someone is very skeptical of astrology, honestly, that's great. I think we should be more skeptical. I do really firmly believe that people that are skeptical are typically really intelligent. So I'm not going to like dog on anyone that's not into astrology. I will say that if you are really skeptical or you think it's stupid, it's most likely because you've only been exposed to your sun sign.
Yeah.
And I would say I would agree with you. I think pop culture astrology is kind of stupid. It's more of like an entertainment thing than it is a comprehensive view of someone's soul. So, I personally, I'm not here to convince anyone. I love astrology. It has become my life's purpose and work, and I'm, honestly obsessed with it. So I'm not really here to convince anyone that they should, take on astrology as a personal practice. Um, but I do think that if it's something that you're interested in, you should look into getting a reading from a professional astrologer that you trust, someone who can really analyze your entire birth chart. And I think that that might help with, some of the, if you are still skeptical, then it might give you a lot more insight and just open your mind a little bit more.
Yeah, I think you're so spot on with that. I feel like growing up, my sister was always more into astrology. I mean, she still is way more into it than I am. Um, but I never really clicked with it. I was like, okay, interesting. I don't totally feel that way, but it's like cool. And then in the last few years, I've been seeing on and off a professional astrologer who's also a therapist. And it's been super profound and helpful. Me and my husband even see her sometimes, and it helps focus on like communication styles and different things that can support us as we work together. So I just think the more you get to know and work with someone about your chart, the more that it can really start to make sense and be a really powerful tool to support you.
Totally. And I think another reason that some people might be not as open to it is just because they aren't ready for it. And so maybe for in your younger years, your soul or your evolution just wasn't exactly there yet. You might have just not had an interest in it. And that doesn't mean that you can't get there or that you don't want to delve into it later in life. I think, honestly, I really believe that we all find astrology when it's meant to find us. And a lot of times it is like when we're going through major life transitions. So I think that astrology can be an incredible tool to help you navigate those things.
Yeah. So a moment ago, we were talking about how what most people know about their astrology is their sun sign. But there's also, I think, when we first start to dive a little bit deeper, people start to talk about the big three. Do you mind sharing what the big three are? You can use me as an example if you want, but you don't have to go there. But what are the big three? How can they help us understand ourselves?
Yeah. So the big three are your sun, your moon, and your rising. And so the sun is your soul's truest identity, I would say. And your moon represents more of your intrinsic self, your emotional self, and it can also show a connection to your mother. And then your rising sign is more of your life's motivation. So, kind of what steers you in the direction that you end up going in. And so, when you put the three together, it really kind of gives you a broader view of the kind of like fundamental pieces of your personality. So for you, Holly, you have your sun in Aquarius, your moon is Libra, and your rising is Gemini. And when I was pulling up your chart just to kind of review it, I was so excited to see you are truly living out your purpose. And a part of why I say that is because, so also, I don't know if you realize this, but you're triple air, which
I
is really,
know.
yeah.
That's why I think I do yoga and ceramics, because I need anything that's going to ground me.
Totally. Yeah. And so, but I was super excited to see that because I was like, wow, like it shows that you are such an intellectual and communication is huge. It's a huge part of your life's purpose. So, like, even this podcast and the work that you're doing, I was so excited to be like, wow, she's really in alignment. You have your sun in your ninth house. So, anytime someone has their sun in their ninth, it shows me that you are truly born to be a teacher, a mentor, a guide, especially in regards to like spirituality and language and arts. And I know that those are all topics that obviously you're really interested in and they play a huge role in your life. So that to me was really cool. And then you have your moon in Libra, and your Libra is in your fifth house. And this was just so magical to me because your fifth house rules over creativity. And I would say you're one of the most, I mean, I know a lot of creative people, but you're a very creative person and have a lot of different talents. And I think that also kind of stems from your Gemini rising because, I'm a Gemini sun, so I understand the Gemini qualities very well. And Gemini risings are storytellers. They are truly here
Mm.
to express and expand and share their knowledge with others. And I think doing that through a podcast couldn't be more spot on for you. So,
That makes me feel there are many moments where I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? But I will be, I mean, to be perfectly honest, like, um, we'll go into this more as we go on, but like, I'm coming out of my Saturn return. And as I was going into my Saturn return and in my Saturn return is when I started to get really interested in astrology because I was having this big moment of like, what am I doing? What feels right? This doesn't anymore. I feel stuck. Like, and I will say, like, working with an astrologer did help me kind of center in of like things that I was already feeling inside of me. Like, none of it was new information. It was all things I felt in me. But having someone say, like, oh, like, the ninth house with communication, that really kind of gave me the push of like, she was like, this is a good time for like higher education and publishing. And I was like, the book that I've had on my mind for years and years, maybe I put it out there. The podcast that I've been wanting to do for years and years, maybe I just try it. And it's been cool to see, I think, like where I am I mean, this podcast is almost 1 year old, and the difference I feel inside of me by doing this and as a part of me that needs to be expressed, I mean, I feel so much better inside. I don't feel as stuck. I feel more alive. And I think a lot of self-doubt can come in, but having that chart is just like, no, those nudges you're feeling, like, keep listening. I think that was really supportive to trying big things. When I think of, and correct me if I'm wrong on like the big three, but when I've had this explained before, I think it sounds similar to what you were saying. This analogy just kind of made it click in my brain, was like your sun sign could be seen as the car that you're driving, like the type of car. It's what people see, kind of like the first impression people get of you. And then your moon sign is like the person driving, like how you feel as you're driving the car, the one who is doing the driving. And then your rising is like where you're going, like the destination you're driving towards. Does that line up?
That's a perfect analogy. I like that a lot.
And then where do North Node and South Node come in? Because I've found this really helpful as I've been kind of scaffolding. Like, I actually think I remember, I'm pretty sure my North Node is in Sagittarius, which is why I think, drawn to you. I'm like, oh, I can learn a lot from Christina because she's got all that Sagittarius in her.
Totally. So the North and South Node are different. They're points in the astrology chart that show kind of like where your soul has been in either a past life, or if you're not open to past lives, maybe just younger years. And then the North Node is more of where your soul wants to go, or your destiny. And so I am an astrologer who likes to subscribe to the idea that it's not necessarily about completely letting go of your South Node, because I think that we come into this life with a lot of gifts and talents that are related to our South Node, but it's about learning to integrate the South Node with your North Node. And a lot of times too, when people find out about their North Node, they don't necessarily love to hear it, because it's truly the opposite sign. So if your North Node is in Sagittarius and your South Node would be in Gemini. So North Node in Sagittarius is here to create more of a single-minded focus instead of having like a million different ideas and a million different topics that you want to dive into. And it's not to say that you still can't be multifaceted, because as a Gemini rising, you are going to be extremely multifaceted, multi-talented, multi-creative. That's just part of your soul. But it's more about like kind of honing in on one area that you really want to put the energy and effort into, so that that area you can become an expert in. And so, and it doesn't have to be like a tiny little area. Like it could be communication or writing or publishing. Like those are kind of all Sagittarius themes anyway. So yeah, I think the North and South Node are really important to look at in your birth chart and to understand. And it may feel very foreign to you, like when you find out your North Node, especially if you're someone, for example, like I have my South Node in Cancer and my North Node is in Capricorn. So I always think of Capricorn as like Oprah energy, like
love that.
off wave kind of energy. And so that's sort of what I'm learning to lean more into. But by nature, I am such an emotional person, like through and through. And so it feels very foreign to me to go in that direction. And I don't know what my past lives were, but I assume that I had a very nurturing role. Maybe I was a mom in different ways. So in this lifetime, I'm kind of learning more to be more career oriented. So it can feel really difficult if it's something that you don't, especially if you don't have strong placements or other planetary bodies with your North Node. So it can be challenging, but I think the more you lean into it instead of away from it, the easier it becomes. Because oftentimes what I find in astrology is if you kind of lean away from your destiny, that's equally as hard, right? Like, because it's painful.
Yeah, there's resistance there because it's like, like we're not quite in alignment. We're not like, I mean, yoga nerding out for a second, but it's like if you're not bone stacking, it's like your muscles are shaking harder to hold your body into place. But if like you're tuning in, moving with your body, lining it up how it needs, it's like softer to be in it. I guess I kind of get tripped up on the rising sign versus your North Node, probably because mine are like, they're exact opposites. But I guess how would you explain the difference between the two? Because they're both kind of what you're working towards, right?
Yeah. So the rising sign in astrology, so I use whole sign house system. And in astrology, when you use the whole sign house system, it divides your chart. Like think of if you're picturing a clock, it divides the chart into 12 equal houses. And in each house, there's 30 degrees. And there's tons of other different forms of house systems that you can use. But I use whole sign because it's the most ancient form of a house system, and it is kind of more aesthetically pleasing. And I think it's a really good one to start with. I plan to learn other house systems later on in my practice, but I think it's really
Mm-hmm.
master one. And so the
Yeah.
reason I bring that up is because in whole sign astrology, your ascendant sign is what maps, or your rising is what maps out all 12 houses. And so that is why astrologers are always saying, like, if you're on YouTube and you're listening to like a forecast, it's like, check your ascendant first. And this is why,
Mm.
because when your ascendant is going to map out all of your 12 houses, and you are not just your sun, your moon, your rising, you are your whole birth chart. And
Mm-hmm.
so your ascendant sign is super important in that regard, because it's really like kind of planning the whole thing for you. Whereas your north node is more of where your soul is working towards. Whereas your rising is kind of like the motivation that's like leading you there. But your north
Mm.
is kind of like, you'll feel more connected to your north node. I think like once you probably have gotten through your first Saturn return, and then maybe even closer to your second return, because it's a lot about maturity. It takes time and effort and life experience to get to your north node. Whereas your ascendant, it's kind of more of like you were born. Your ascendant is what was the sign that was rising over the eastern horizon when you were born. That's why it's called the rising sign. And so that is already an identity that you feel really close to and connected to. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I would say the North Node feels pretty opposite to that, because it's really foreign and you're not used to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for clearing that up.
Mm.
This is something I don't really know like anything about, but my sister was telling me about it. What is midheaven and how does that relate?
Yeah, so your midheaven, so again, if you're thinking about an astrology chart as a clock, so your midheaven is the highest point of your chart. And so the opposite of the midheaven is your IC, which represents the lowest point of your chart. In most people's charts, or maybe not even most, but a lot of people's charts, they'll have their IC in their fourth house, which represents your home, your family, your private life, your ancestry, your roots.
Mm.
Whereas the MC is the highest part of your chart. So think of when you're in society, it's like you're out into the world, people can see you, it's your public reputation, how people just view you out into the world. And so your MC is related to your career, because, when we have a career, it's maybe not for everyone, but a lot of times it's a more public sphere. Like you're not going to act the same way that you act like at your job that you act at home potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, I would say that's true for. So your MC is your kind of, yeah, the career destiny of your chart, I would say.
Do you know what my midheaven is?
Um,
You don't have to.
no, let me look really quick. I have it on my phone. You have your MC in Pisces, and it's in your 10th house. And so that shows me, so Pisces is a very spiritual sign, and Pisces also encompasses all 12 signs. So it's like
Mm.
you are someone who is here to do more spiritual work. And so it's just great, because I love that you're really in alignment with it. It's
Awesome. I love that. It's my reminder when I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing? I also love what you were saying too. This is something working with an astrologer has helped me a lot with understanding my chart. Is even while we have these like main components, like, and there's so much more, we haven't even gone into the houses or anything like that. But even just, I know like with my sun sign is Aquarius, but I have Saturn conjunct my sun, which makes me kind of come out a lot more Capricorny. So like while Aquarius wants to be like different and like do the goofy like unique thing, there's like this Saturn Capricorn energy that's like hard on myself, like you got to do this, go go go, push push push. And that really, I think knowing those like subtle elements about a birth chart can really help you get a better understanding of yourself too.
totally. And when I saw that in your chart too, I was thinking like, to me, it also shows that you'll have a strong drive to be successful, to like really push yourself. And also, it kind of makes sense to me why during your Saturn return is when you got interested in astrology, especially because it's a very strong placement in your chart.
If listening to this episode has made you really curious about wanting to know more about your birth chart, we've got a special offer just for How the Wise One Grows listeners. You can get 15% off your first astrology reading with Christina of Lua Astrology by using the code WISEONE15. So speaking of Saturn return, this is definitely a question that came in. What is a Saturn return?
So a Saturn return is when Saturn, the planet of Saturn, returns to exactly where it was when you were born. And so, for example, you and I both just completed our Saturn returns, which
we did it.
We did it. Honestly, I want to say to anyone listening, if you have Saturn in Aquarius, please give yourself a huge pat on the back because we not only went through our Saturn return, we went through our Saturn return with the pandemic. So
yes.
Anyone with Saturn in Aquarius, Saturn ingressed into Aquarius. I can't remember the exact date, but it was basically March of 2020. And then we completed it March 7th of 2023. So just a couple weeks, which is wild, right? Like, and Saturn in Aquarius, it's so interesting because like the concept of like social distancing is so very much Saturn in Aquarius because Aquarius is like the humanitarian wanting to do more for the greater good. And then Saturn brings restrictions and delays and setbacks. And so we were restricted from each other, like social concept of social distancing is very Saturn return vibes for anyone that has Saturn Aquarius. But so to get back to Saturn return, it typically happens, Saturn typically returns to the place that it was in your birth chart between the ages of 27 to about 30. And it's different for everyone. And the reason why, and when you watch videos on this, like if you're ever on YouTube, kind of like curious, you'll get so many different answers. Like some astrologers will be like 28 to 31. And the reason is because for everyone, it's different and it depends on your exact degree. So if you pull up your birth chart and you look at your degree of Saturn, if you have a really early degree of Saturn, so if it's like 0 to 5, you will probably experience it a little bit younger, so closer to like 27. If you have a later degree of Saturn, like, 28 or 29 degrees, then you will probably experience your exact Saturn return transit closer to 30 or 31. And that's why there's kind of this like confusion of when does it start, but it's different for everyone. And so we actually have up to 3 Saturn returns in a lifetime, if we make it to about age 88. So the first one is around 27 to 30. The second one is around 57 to 60. And then the third one is around like 87 to 90, give or take. And so also to kind of explain a little bit deeper of like what this is all about. So Saturn is the planet that rules over restrictions and delays and hard work. Think like grandfather, or I like to say like zaddy, like it's like the daddy zodiac. So it's a very strict placement where it's all about kind of stepping into your full maturity. And I would definitely argue, and maybe, you can speak on this too, Holly. We all obviously, everyone's like, okay, when you turn 18, you're an adult. But for me personally, like, I do not think I was truly an adult at all.
No.
This going through my Saturn return is what has like really blossomed me into adulthood. And so I think that it's a time period where a lot of people will go through major, major changes and transitions. And this is oftentimes when people are seeking an astrologer. And I would actually say that when you are going through your Saturn return, or honestly, even better, if you're about to go through it, it's the best time to get an astrology reading because this is when a lot of times people go through career changes. They'll move across the country. Either they're getting married or they're getting divorced or going through big breakups. And it can just feel like a time when your life is like thrown up in the air and you're just like waiting for all the pieces to fall down and you don't really know what's happening, and it can feel really intense and honestly really scary. I'm not going to lie. Like my Saturn return was, pretty intense and,
Yes.
just not fun at all. But I will say the lessons that you learn from Saturn return, I think they're just so valuable because it really helps you to become more in alignment with who you are. And I will say that if you are out of alignment, your Saturn return is going to shake up your life, because it's like if you're working the dead end job, if you're working something that you're not passionate about, if you are in a relationship that isn't serving you, Saturn is going to come in and just be like, all right, are you sure you really want this? And it's going to feel harder and harder if you're not, getting yourself into alignment. So it's a really good time to have a reading because it can be very helpful for an astrologer to guide you through. And they can do that by looking to see, where you have Saturn in your birth chart. So right now, Saturn has just moved into the sign of Pisces. So anyone between the ages or born under the years of like 1993 to about 1996 are going through their Saturn return right now. And so you can have an astrologer look to see what house you have it in, and then if there's other planets that are aspecting it. And the thing is too, like depending on, in astrology, there's a concept of malefic planets and then benefic. So if you have more malefic planets close to your Saturn or aspecting your Saturn, you may have a more challenging Saturn return. That was very true for me. I had some malefic planets aspecting my Saturn. So it's kind of like two malefic planets and they were in a square. So it's like one of the most difficult. But again, not everyone has that. Like some people have more benefic planets aspecting their Saturn, and it could be a time where they get married or, they move in a good way or buy a house. So it doesn't have to be scary for everyone by any means. I mean, it still would probably be challenging and a big transition, but this is another reason why it's a really good idea to get a reading to kind of know what to expect for your Saturn return.
Yeah, I quite honestly think with Saturn being so strong in my chart during my Saturn return, I was like, oh my gosh, like it was such a hard time. And I will say, I found that it like having that awareness of, okay, Saturn's really strong in your chart. You're going through a Saturn return right now. It kind of gave me like a little bit of grace, and honestly I felt like support with my mental health instead of like letting my Saturn get even stronger and like beating myself up about like, oh, why are you feeling this way? You shouldn't be feeling this way. Like feeling like I needed a solution all the time. There was a level in which I could be like, that's like my Saturn voice doing its thing right now. Like it's going to be really heavy right now. And like that's it's like this right now. And then okay, I could like peel a layer and like, adjust as needed and continue. But just having that awareness really, really helped. Which this is a question that someone sent in, which I love. And is how and would you, I guess, link astrology to mental wellness and well-being, and how can, or not even how, but just can it support our mental health from your perspective?
Yeah, I love this question. I think that astrology, the way that I would approach this is by looking at certain placements. So, if you do have stronger malefic energy, you might be someone who goes through some major life transitions or you could have harder things happen in your life. And so I think astrology is really an amazing tool to be able to navigate that. And like, for example, so Gemini, Mars has been in the sign of Gemini for the past 8 months. And this is not really a typical thing because it normally only stays in a sign for about like maybe up to like a month or so, maybe 2 months. But it was in Gemini for a long time. And for me, it was transiting my seventh house of relationships. And so Mars is planet of like aggression and action and willpower. And so as an astrologer, knowing this, I'm like looking at this, like knowing that, okay, this is going to be an 8 months of intensity, especially in regards to my relationships. And had I not known that as an astrologer, maybe I would have allowed myself to get in more fights or like have more conflict. And so this is a really great way to kind of answer this question of like, you can use astrology to look at how the planets are impacting you. And so, or for another example, could be like maybe you're someone who has really strong 12th house placements. I have a coworker who has her sun in the 12th, and the 12th house rules kind of like our unconscious mind. It's sort of the area in the chart where you can't really see yourself as much. And sometimes people that have the sun in the 12th, they require a lot more alone time and solitude. That's okay. And I think when you know these things about yourself, instead of judging yourself, that allows you to have more compassion and more understanding. And I think that is really the gift of astrology. It's a tool of self-awareness and, having more just understanding and compassion for yourself. And not only for yourself, but when you can do that for you, then you can also apply that to others. And so astrology can help you when you are going through a hard time to kind of almost more just like validate that it's a hard time and kind of explain why or give you sort of tools as to like what you might be feeling or going through. And I think it's just a great way to navigate these like harder transits.
Yeah, I really love that you land on like it's a tool for having understanding and compassion for ourselves and others, which I just feel like is so spot on. It just helps me. I mean, this is where I feel like it can become like again, like similar to a yoga or mindfulness practice. It helps increase our awareness of like, okay, right now it's like this. This is what's happening. There's not judgment. There's not attachment. We're going to be compassionate with what is because this is what's present. And I definitely find it's helpful in working with others. I mean, doing some sessions with my husband has been so helpful. Like things that I'm like, our communication is opposite ends. I'm Pisces. I don't know what's opposite Pisces, but like, and it made so much sense to me. And it doesn't mean that it's like a make or break situation, but it's like there's some areas where there's a lot of strengths and great. And then you have to know, like, when it comes to communication, like it's going to be harder. So here are ways, Holly, that you can like listen to the ways that Will is communicating with you that are totally foreign to you and try to hear what he's saying. And then Will, like, here's ways you can listen to what Holly's saying, even if it's in a totally different way than what you're used to. So I think it can really help build connection and almost like bridges to these like things that might seem like a barrier we have. It can help us kind of figure out like, okay, not this key to unlock that door. Let's try this one instead.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm so glad that you brought this up because another topic that or just a point that I wanted to make for people that do have more challenging placements, like, you have your sun conjunct Saturn, which that is a challenging placement. But I will tell you, as someone who has very challenging placements in their birth chart, honestly, after, and I don't mean this from any form of judgment at all, but now that I've looked at like hundreds of charts and I've been doing this practice for over a year, I find that I'm so much more drawn to reading charts that are like more challenging because to me, when you have a lot of trines, so trines in astrology bring blessings and good fortune. It's almost like you're kind of just born into life with a little bit more ease, for example. Um, and sextiles, when you have a lot of sextiles in your chart, it can show that like you have the capacity to kind of like reach your blessings, but you still have to work hard for them. And then if you have a lot of like squares or oppositions, it shows that you are here to learn a lot of lessons and there's going to be like a lot more push and pull. And so I'm someone who has a ton of opposition in my chart. I have a lot of squares. And when you're first learning about astrology, it can be kind of overwhelming. You're like, God, like, why did I pick this? Like, if you subscribe to the idea that you chose this lifetime, and I like to think of it as, well, we're not necessarily all old souls. Like, I think a lot of people love to say that they're an old soul, but if you really want to know if you're an old soul, you need to look at your chart because, and this is to have compassion for both sides. Like, I have done a lot of readings for people that, I would say they're more like new souls. And I look at their chart and I'm like, this is so boring. Like in my mind, I'm just like, I would be so bored if this was my life because I mean, I'm not trying to like toot my own horn, but I really believe that I am an older soul and I was born on a full moon lunar eclipse. Like that alone is like I'm someone, the way that I interpret it is like I'm here to provoke people, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but I'm a very emotionally in tune person, and I find I didn't even really realize that some people weren't as emotionally aware as me until
Mm,
later in life. Like I had no idea that like some people were so closed off to their emotions. And I just think that like when you understand that like not all of us are here on the same path or journey, and some of our souls are much more evolved and others are new souls. And so it's like that gives you compassion, and you're not going to judge people as much if they're making mistakes or, God forbid, like do something terrible, because maybe their soul is newer and they chose this life because this is what they can handle. So even though I might pull up someone's chart and be bored by it and think that their life is so easy, it's never really fully easy. Like we all go through our struggles, and I think we come into our lives with kind of the amount of struggle that we can handle. And sometimes that's not the case. So too, I will say, like, obviously we know that like, not to get dark, but like sometimes people can't handle what they've been given, and
mm-hmm.
we know like that can be really tragic. But I would say like for the most part, I really love using astrology to have compassion, because it just helps me in my relationships when I can dive into someone's chart. And even if like it looks to me like their life is so easy, I think a lot of times people that have a lot of trines, they struggle with complacency. And to me, that's also not easy. And even though I would
Yeah.
never want that in my life, I feel like because I have been in survival mode almost my entire life, I have a really strong drive and a willpower to grow and succeed. Whereas some people who have come into life with literally a silver platter and everything handed to them, they don't grow or evolve because it's just like complacency. It's just too easy, and but that can be painful in itself. So I think that we really need to have awareness and compassion for everyone, because we're just all in different areas and different souls and have different directions and different paths. And, maybe some people came into this life because they're like on their last leg and they're like, you know what, this is going to be a fun party life. And who are we to judge them for that? Like, kudos,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they have accomplished a lot and they're just here to hang out and party. Like, I shouldn't judge them for that. So I think it's really important to just know that about astrology and know that there's a lot of depth when you really dive into someone's chart.
So this is another question someone sent that I think leans a lot into what you said. But do you think that we are trapped by our astrology, or can we grow beyond our birth chart and maybe the limitations or things that it says about us? I think that might be like a big reason people have a fear around astrology, is they're like, I don't want to have in my mind that I'm going to be this way or that way or the other, because then that's the course I'll take. Um, so I guess like what would be your take on that?
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's a really important question to answer because, yeah, I have seen that. I've seen a lot of fear mongering in astrology, and I don't subscribe to that at all. And maybe again, this is because I'm ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter loves to be, benefic and positive, and so I really try hard to always kind of spend things in the positive light, because in my opinion, it's equally hard to be negative. Like it's almost harder in my mind to be negative than to like lean towards the positive. But what I would say to like people asking if they're trapped by their birth chart, and I would say absolutely not. We all have free will as humans, and even though like, this might be kind of like an outline or a guideline of things that you could experience, astrology can't like control you and dictate your life. You have free will as a human, and you can really do anything that you want. If you want to look at your birth chart and you're like, nope, I don't want to do any of this, I'm going to stay in my south node, I'm going to stay in my comfort zone, or not, or like I think if you are a new astrologer, it's really important to make sure that you are very ethical with the way that you present this information, because we don't want astrology to continue to get a bad rep. Like, yes, there are planets in astrology like Saturn and Pluto that are more malefic. I mean, even Mars is malefic, but it's like Mars can bring action and drive and willpower. Yes, it's also aggression and anger, but it's not all bad. And so, having Pluto somewhere can bring transformation, and birth and death can be a theme, but it's more, in my opinion, kind of like alchemy or transmuting that energy. And it's really important, I think, to make sure that you're being very mindful of that if you are an astrologer, especially if you're, just getting into this, and just being very mindful and cautious and careful of how you present the information, because we never want to scare anyone or create fear. Because, in my opinion, astrology is here as a tool to help guide you, not to scare you.
Yeah, and the way that I see it and have had things in my chart explained is just like you said, like here are the strengths and here are the struggles of this aspect in your chart. And the way I see that is like, it doesn't mean I am controlled by this. It means that like I can lean this way or I can lean that way, and I'm going to experience both likely. And I have the agency to see which way I can let this one play out. And to me, I again see it similar to my other practices of like experiencing the wholeness, like the struggles in my chart and the strengths in my chart, and not letting like, I think Pluto is something with my sun sign in my chart, and not letting that be like a super negative. But again, it's like, yeah, there's like a heaviness and a darker quality, but there's also this like, deep transformation and like a lot of beauty that can come from it. So I really think it's a good reminder that these charts aren't like, we are people living day to day, and this can be a tool that supports you if we look at it through the whole scope, but it's not going to define your destiny. It's just saying these are aspects that are within you, and all of it is within all of us. And just here's ways it might feel and impact you in your life.
Yeah, it's so funny that you brought the Pluto part up, because I remember when I looked at your chart, I wrote this down because I was really excited to see this. You have Pluto sextile your moon, and that's a really cool placement because it shows to me that you have the ability to have strong emotional depth. And I think that's why I value our friendship so much,
Mm.
because I'm very similar and I love going deep with people. And so it's a really beautiful placement to have, because you are someone who can pull that out of people. And I think that's why you're such a good this doing this podcast is so amazing, and you're so good at it, because you create a safe space for people to really be able to tap in and tune into their emotions, or maybe even some of the more uncomfortable topics, because they're important. And so I really value that about you. And I think when you can look at astrology from that light, like maybe someone else could have seen it as a more like challenging aspect, but to me, I just see it makes you such a beautiful person and who you really are.
Thank you. Yeah, I've definitely noticed like there are times where I have felt that aspect in like a heavy darkness way when I keep it inside of me. But like when I have spaces like this, I find the beauty in it. So I see that again as like the way that like there's that wholeness to it. It's a thing that can feel heavy sometimes, and it's a thing that can bring so much like light and strength into the other aspects that are present.
Yeah.
Um, do you use astrology to guide you through major life events? And I guess like how do you do that if you do?
Yeah, so I love this question. So today, I'm when we're recording, today is the Aries new moon. And so I'm super excited. I love that we're recording on this because
So special. And it was a mistake that it happened this way, which is just such a happy accident.
such a happy accident. It's so auspicious. So today, even when people are listening to this, like the energy will probably still, I guess, depending on when this gets put out. But regardless, today is one of the most auspicious days of the year. So I love that. It's a really potent, magical time. And so to answer your question, yes, I don't do it daily per se, but when I know that major astrological transits are coming up, I do pay big attention to those. And so, for example, Aries is transiting my fifth house. So my fifth house rules over creativity, it's entrepreneurship, it's romance, play, children. And I have just had so much energy in those kind of areas come up for me. And it's so funny because um, my intention for 2023 was actually for 2023 to be the year of play for me, just like fun and creativity. And I honestly hadn't really like looked into the future, or like figured out that I think this is why, because wherever you have your so Aries new moon in astrology is the astrological new year. And for me personally, I don't really subscribe to the January 1st new year. I mean, like obviously I acknowledge it, but
Yeah.
I never really feel like my year has kind of like transitioned until about this point. It's also in alignment with the spring equinox, so maybe that's why. But when I looked into what this transit was for me, I was like, oh, no wonder I was like, this is the year of play. And because that's really what I'm calling in. And so wherever you have your the Aries new moon, wherever it's transiting in your chart, will show you kind of like the themes of what's to come, because this new moon is like the most auspicious new moon of the year. So yes, I do love to use astrology to kind of look into the future and just kind of know what's ahead. And I do that by it's you can pull up your chart and then add the current transit wheel and look at the planets and how they're aspecting your birth chart. And if that's something that you are interested in, I know that might sound kind of confusing to anyone who's not really sure of what I'm talking about, but if that's something that you're interested in, definitely check out working with an astrologer. Any astrologer can pull up your chart for you and look at the transits, and it's super, super helpful to kind of just get a gist of what's ahead for you, and like what the major shifts are going to be. And actually, 2023 is a huge year of major shifts. We had just a couple weeks ago, Saturn moved into Pisces. And then in a couple days, we're going to have Gemini moving into Cancer, which I'm so excited about because it's Gemini for 8 months. And then we are also having Pluto move into Aquarius. It has been in Capricorn for the past 20 years. So it's, or maybe it's the past 14 years. I can't remember, but it's been there for a long time. And so it's moving into Aquarius now, and it's going to be in Aquarius for about the next 20 years. So this is going to affect us all collectively because this is an outer planet. So it's not going to be as more of like a personal impact, but it will be a collective impact. So because 2023 we've had all of this kind of happening at once, I think that's why the past couple weeks have been really intense for a lot of people. And it's like if you know these kind of things, then you can sort of prepare for it, and just make sure that you know, a lot of times for me, it's like, okay, don't get in fights, or like, don't say something. Just be mindful of your energy when you're interacting with others, because especially if you know that like collectively we're all kind of being triggered, it's really helpful to be able to navigate life. And that's how I love to use astrology. And
Yeah. I feel like we can't make it through a podcast that's talking about astrology without asking this question. But what does it mean when a planet is retrograde? And what does that mean for astrology and astronomy? Like what does that mean? Because that's something people are always saying.
yeah, so basically when a planet is retrograde, it's the way that I like to describe it is okay, so like think about when you're on the interstate and you're in your car and there's a car, maybe you have like slowed down and there's a car like moving faster than you, and it almost feels like you're going in reverse, like when
Mm-hmm.
stuff kind of passes you. So it's similar to that in astrology. The planet isn't actually moving backwards per se, but it has to do with the orbit of the Earth. And um, so sometimes when there's retrogrades, it can create more of like an introspective energy. So a lot of times, if people have strong, if their planets in their natal birth chart are retrograde, like when they were born, then they can have a little bit more introspective energy, maybe in that specific area or chart or part of their chart. So it's a really good time to go inward, to review, reflect, and just kind of like tune more inwards, is how I really describe it.
Hmm. That's a good way to see it. Because I think a lot of times it gets a bad rep when it's like, oh, this is in retrograde. But it might just be like, hey, let's slow down right now. Let's like tune in, check in a little right now.
And the thing is too that So Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto all go retrograde. But we always hear about Mercury, and the
Yeah.
reason is because Mercury is closest to us, whereas Pluto is furthest away. And Pluto is retrograde for like half the year, but we never really talk about it because it's more of a generational planet than like a personal planet. And so that's why Mercury retrograde always gets a bad rap, because it's like people think that, I mean, because Mercury does kind of have more of like a personal pull, whereas Pluto is more generational. And even though Pluto stays retrograde for way longer than Mercury, people aren't really as in tune with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Mercury is like a lot to do with communication, so it makes sense that we would see and experience what that's like more and more in the day to day. So, this has been so much fun. I personally really want to do a full reading with you. But how can people support you and your work and work with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on my website. It's luaastrology.com. I'm also on TikTok and Instagram. Um, and yeah, I mean, you can just support me by connecting with me there. And I would love to connect with you guys very, very soon. So if you're interested, if you're going through your Saturn return or just want support or need guidance, please reach out. Saturn return readings are now like my favorite thing to do, especially because I just completed mine. And so it's something I'm very passionate about, and I would love to help guide you through it. So if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your time and so much knowledge and compassion with us through this conversation today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
We've got a special offer just for How the Wise One Grows listeners. You can get 15% off your first astrology reading with Christina of Lua Astrology by using the code WISE115. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to How the Wise One Grows today. If this podcast has been impactful in your life, can you support it by following and subscribing to this podcast on your favorite streaming platform? This will make sure you never miss an episode. All you have to do is go to the show page for How the Wise One Grows and hit the plus or the follow button in the top right-hand corner. While you're there, go ahead and leave a review, preferably a 5-star review, and share an episode with someone you love in your life. And if you want to support even further, you can join the How the Wise One Grows Dream Team and become a part of a group of magical people who support this podcast every month. And you'll even get a special shout out in an upcoming episode. Until the next time, let's keep taking it one breath at a time.